So I'll be talking about plyometrics today. And to begin, we should create an understanding of what plyometrics is. So to be defined as plyometrics, an exercise must move through a stretch and shortening cycle at a rapid pace with the objective of increasing power. Now, what does a stretch and shortening cycle actually mean? Well, it first needs to look at a singular muscle. In this case, we've chosen the quadricep, and it goes through shortening, concentric motion, into an eccentric motion, or vice versa, and then back into concentric and eccentric. So it just got to move from a shortened or lengthened state, the muscle, and then back. But one thing in particular to focus on is it's all about perspective of what's contracting, because if your quadriceps are contracting, your hamstrings are lengthening. There's an agnostic and antagonist relationship. So in this case, your hamstrings will be in the eccentric motion when standing, and concentric when in that load, sort of getting into that load and explosive position. Now, there's many ways to do plyometrics. It's all about that stretch and shortening cycle. So you could do that with lateral jumps, a single leg lunge to knee drive, even plyo push-ups, or the common depth jumps. Now, there's 3 phases, and we've talked mainly about just moving from eccentric to concentric. So this idea of coming in from a standing position to the sitting squat, and moving from that neutral to eccentric, and then being in that bottom position is called the load position or amortization, and then you move into that concentric phase. Now, what's really important is many people have come under the belief that we generate the power by storing that elastic potential energy, almost like a rubber band. But that's not actually what the research is showing. Physiologically, what it's showing is by being in an active state, we can generate more power. So take the example on the screen. Imagine being in that lunge position for only 1.1 second, and your muscles being active. You'll be able to jump much higher into this second position. But if you were in that lunge for 2 minutes and your muscles stop being active, it'd be much harder to get into that jump position. It's all about how active you can be, and that comes down to ground contact time and neuromuscular connection. And the reason this is because if you're in an active state while stretching, supposedly more myosin heads can bind with actin, and that means that more cross bridges can form during the exercise. And so, as I slightly mentioned before, being in this load phase for too long will decrease power. So there's an understanding that you want to reduce ground contact time, and for many exercises that's 0.2 seconds supposedly, but it's just as low as possible. Now, what does plyometrics improve? So the first is a myotatic reflex. Now, myotatic reflex is an involuntary neuromuscular reaction to a stretch of a muscle. So when you stretch your muscle, your spindles will automatically start to contract to bring you back to a state where you can apply force. And the more you do that, the more you perform this exercise, the quicker and more efficient that connection becomes. So your rate of muscle firing will increase, and you'll get the edge in sport. A common misconception as well is that plyometrics doesn't develop strength. Whenever there's resistance and microfibers being damaged positively, where you'll have repair and adaptation of the muscle fiber, you'll be developing strength. And there's a lot of shock absorption, eccentric muscle movements, and resistance from gravity and heights of dropping. Now, that will all cause micro tears and adaptations in the strength factor. So let's look at power, because power is a real objective. So power is force times distance divided by time, or force times velocity. When you really break down this equation, what we're really looking to do is move through the movement at an accelerated pace, or with greater resistance, can we move through it quicker? It's all about, with a constant, can we move quicker past the resistance? And so who does this apply to? Why would anyone want to do plyometrics? And the real thing is, most sports are power related, and there's few which are more endurance, like marathons, runners and bikers, and some which have a real ability to just be strength to some extent, such as bodybuilders or even maybe American football linemen. But fundamentally, if you're moving through movements quickly and your ground contact time is small, or change in direction or reflexes are a factor, you're going to be under the power realm, and plyometrics would be beneficial to you. So because generation of power is functional, if that's the case, it will give you the edge. Have quick direction changes in soccer, high reaction times for throwing a punch. You can think about moving back your arm in an active state and then applying force quickly. And volleyball players looking to jump and block the ball, and sprinters, where although you need to apply a lot of strength, what they're showing is they're not really hitting the ground for more than 0.9 seconds. And therefore, you're not going to be able to really tap into strength. And it's more going to be about the speed at which, or the rate at which, you can develop power. Now, something to consider is what they call interserial rest time. And we've spoken about this in class, where plyometrics, if your goal is to increase your max strength or max ability to move through the movement, you're going to want to put the plyometrics at the start of the session, because your muscles are always going to adapt based on how you train them. And if you want to improve at the max, then you should have long rest time to be able to continue through those sets when you're fresh and can hit as close to that level as possible. But it should be noted, if you want to develop power when you're fatigued, you can start to mix it into training later on in the session. Now, another real advantage is injury prevention. By being in an eccentric motion, or eccentric state, shall I say, you're going to help to prevent injuries, because most of the injuries, if it's not a single direct contact, is going to be where you're not used to being in that stretched position, that full range of motion under a certain force. And so you'll be able to increase like your cross-sectional area, improve neuromuscular control, and test adaptations in full range of motion. We've spoken about Nordic curls, and while it's not a plyometric movement, it fully goes through that eccentric movement. And the plyometric squats and other movements we've spoken about are a very similar concept. Can we test under force a full stretching of the muscle and then moving into the contraction phase, which is even more functional than the Nordic curls, arguably. So what's key is, spoken briefly about it, if max power is the objective, do the plyometrics at the start of the gym session. We should also focus on recovery time between sessions being similar to any gym session where there's strength hypertrophy involved, because if you damage muscle fibers, it's generally regarded as being about 24 to 48 hours for full recovery, sometimes even 72 hours. And there's need for practicing shock absorption techniques and sort of iterating through the levels of plyometrics, because just moving into very advanced movement straight away can cause injury. Now, so how do you progress? Well, they recommend at the beginning just going into drop freezes and snap downs. You can see that at the in red, where you're just learning to absorb forces and on the ground. Intermediate would be jumping onto boxes, because you're still not having full shock absorption and risk of injury by jumping onto the box. And then the advanced is, can you do depth jumps, combinations of single leg and balance, and increasing power in the full range of motion at full speed. So looking at some articles to see if it actually works, there was a famous study which came out where they looked at pre-pubertal males, and they subjected them to 8 weeks of plyometric training and had a control group which was not. And they looked at a variety of athletic indicators, such as neuromuscular efficiency by using a EMG, and speed, jump height, and length as key indicators. And the results were absolutely amazing. A 98% increase in gastrocnemius, vasa lateralis, and bicep femoris muscle activation, so the ability to move through the movement quicker when you want to activate it, increased jump height, increased jump length, and decreased time to move through 20-meter sprint time, which are all really easy to understand how those could affect our sport. And it was just 8 weeks of plyometric training. Another study looked at 22 basketball players with a control, and they assessed jumping, agility, and sprint performance after plyometric exercises. What's really important to understand about this study is they just wanted to look at how it affected post-activation potentiation. So post-activation potentiation being how ready were your muscles, or could they adapt by being primed? So what they did was they subjected a group of basketball players to plyometric exercises, and then immediately looked at 4 and 12-minute performance metrics. So if you primed your muscles with plyometrics, i.e. if you did a plyometrics warm-up, how did your performance change? And the results were also statistically significant, where jump and agility performance were improved. What's really important, I think, as well, is to understand if your goal is power, plyometrics are not the only way, such as ballistic exercises can train power. Anytime you're moving a force with resistance at speed, you'll be training power. Plyometrics are an amazing way. It's super functional, but you can think about a kettlebell swing, a med ball throw, a sled push. They are also training power. But in summary, plyometrics move through a stretch shortening cycle. You get neuromuscular and eccentric adaptations, which improve sport performance, and by making you have the edge and reducing injuries. There's interserial rest time and active ground contact time as being incredibly important. You want to keep rest time at a high, around 2 minutes, if you're looking to increase your max levels, and reducing your ground contact times, making sure that your muscles are in active state. This is pertains to any athlete looking to increase power, any quick directional change, or reflexes. It pertains to most sports, and progression is really key to make sure you optimally grow and don't cause injury during this time. Thanks.